What did a teacher do that made you automatically gain respect for them? I went to a small charter school for middle school.
Our English literature teacher was brand new to teaching.
If I remember correctly, she was only 22, which seemed old at the time. She always did her best to be so cheerful and make learning fun. But the thing that truly solidified her spot as my favorite teacher was that for every student's birthday, she would give you a personalized mini notebook. It was just a simple small composition notebook, but she had filled the first couple pages telling me how much she loved having me as a student, how far she knew I would go, and other affirmations. It seemed small, but as a 13-year-old who had a crappy home life, it made all the difference in how I acted the rest of the year. I had a physical education teacher who organized basketball, volleyball, handball and football tournaments, organized Olympic Games for the local kids, and taught us dancing on weekends. On his own, just for us kids, because we lived in a remote place without many activities and things going on. He was more than a simple teacher. When I was a kid, we had to purchase these red punch cards to get lunch at school. Unfortunately, we didn't have that much money, so there were times where my punch card would run out, and I wasn't able to eat for a while until we got enough money to repurchase another one.
Why nobody in my family applied for assistance was beyond me.
I had one teacher who noticed I wasn't eating every day, and she would bring an extra sandwich and offer it to me whenever she saw that. I really didn't understand how kind that was when I was a kid, but obviously as an adult that was such an amazing gesture of kindness. Not take my shit. I was a pretty decent writer in school, able to pop stuff out pretty quickly that was superficial but sounded good. The first time I had a teacher hand my work back pointing out that I managed to compellingly fail to say anything was sort of a slap in the face that I didn't realize I needed. I had a professor once state that she doesn't believe in trick questions.
Students trick themselves up enough without the professor helping that along.
She never did put trick questions. Junior year of high school. English class. We were discussing a story we had read. One student, let's call him Carl, made a point. The teacher was dismissive and basically said Carl was wrong. The next day, after we took our seats, the teacher said, "Before we begin, I was thinking about what Carl said yesterday. I was wrong to dismiss it so quickly. Let's take a look at that again." He then went on to repeat Carl's point and initiate a conversation with the entire class. After the conversation, it became apparent Carl's point was indeed off base. But I was impressed the teacher publicly owned his mistake and went down the path he should have. A math teacher went to the hospital several times to visit a student who had been seriously injured in an accident. The teacher offered companionship, free tutoring, and genuine encouragement. Told us a joke about his name before we could, and allowed us to eat during his classes because kids your age can't help being hungry all the time, as long as we did it quietly. Great guy. His whole attitude made all of us actually pay attention and do our best. It was a professor, but she said she wasn't going to have a textbook for the class. Basically, she didn't respect the textbook representatives trying to take the pharma approach to force kids to buy an $170 access code. Instant respect. You just had to show up to the lectures and she'd teach you what you needed to know. Math teacher.
I don't care if you have good grades or bad grades.
If you work hard, I will work harder to make you pass. He worked hard for me. I passed. English teacher in high school asked where my homework was. Responded, I forgot to do it, and he said to the rest of the class, why can't you guys be like scratch underscore that underscore. He doesn't come up with some excuse, he just tells me he didn't do it. I had a business studies teacher who used to be a mental health professional. So she knew the signs when my depression was particularly bad. For example, submitting work at 3 a.m. and would always make sure I had eaten and offered me coffee and generally made her classroom a safe space for anyone.
Sechstein, if you're reading this, you're amazing.
Instead of shouting at my loud class for not shutting up before the lesson began, my history teacher decided to quietly tell the story of a pink elephant that wanted to be an astronaut. After a few seconds, people started to shut up and listen about the pink elephant. When everyone was quiet and listening, he stopped mid-story. As much as it made me respect him, "Why didn't you finish the story, FFS? That cliffhanger." I moved out of home during high school. It was stressful, to say the least. I started to fall behind in assignments. I would be absent for days at a time. I missed tests, etc. I ended up explaining the bare minimum of my situation to my English teacher, and their response always stuck with me: "Just do what you can." It may not seem like much, but right then and there, for a 16-year-old kid who felt like simply living was a burden, it was everything. I told my English teacher about my unfortunate experience at my last school. Just stupid people treating me like crap. And he approached me after class and said, "Hey, I'm sorry that happened to you. You know, there's a phrase in the English language that I think you ought to know. F***ck them." I remember my 5th grade teacher had every student circle one book from the Scholastic Book Fair flyer. When the day came for the fair, if you didn't go to the library to purchase that book for yourself, she would buy it with her own money to make sure every student got to take a book home. I wouldn't have had any books of my own if it weren't for her. It was small, but he told us he was going to be in a bad mood that day because someone stole his bike. Just treating us like people was something that was rare in that school. My high school science teacher paused class to rip a student apart for bullying another student. Called it out as soon as it happened, in front of everyone, and that bully never went near that other kid again. We'll always remember that.
In my first year of high school,
my class decided to play a simple prank on our English SOS teacher, by all laughing when he faced the board, and then stopping every time he turned around to face us. After a few minutes of this, he just left the classroom without a word. We all sat there, confused, until a few minutes later the assistant principal comes in and explains that we've really upset our teacher. He made us believe we'd seriously fucked up. Then our teacher walked in and pretty much went, "Gotcha." Quote, "That son of a bitch had our respect from then on."
I remember my first math class in college. I didn't take any math my senior year of high school because I finished my math requirements my
junior year. Anyway, the first math test hit me like a truck after never having to try in high school, and I scored in
the low 60s.
The next 3 tests, I learned to study and got 398s in a row. The last week of class, the professor, who is a hard ass by the way and would kick you out for having your phone out, called me up to her desk after class and said, "Clearly you were having a bad day that first exam. So don't worry about that grade because I won't count it." It really changed my view of that professor. I had a professor that made it crystal clear that if we ever made an appointment and didn't show up, he'd take 5 points off of our final grade. I tried to find him during office hours and he wasn't available. I told him that I deserved an extra 5 points because he wasn't available when he said he would be, and he gave it to me in the interest of fairness. My band director, he laughed with us. He talked to us like people instead of lowly teenage students, and he read to us the power of positive thinking. He saw a need for it. Some of the kids were bored out of their skulls and thought it was stupid, but some of us listened. Personally, I love that he recognized a problem and took action. I've been out of high school for 30 years this year. I'm still in touch with him. He's the most influential person in my life that is not related to me. And it's because he chose to invest and do more than bare minimum as a teacher. I had a professor in college who was 5 minutes late to the start of an 8 a.m. lecture and clearly distraught. She started by apologizing for the delay and explaining that she just got off the phone with her sister telling her that her mother just died of cancer. The remainder of her lectures for the day were cancelled, but she was going to try to keep it together enough to do ours since we were already there so early in the morning. I respected that she decided to give us the lecture we had come for despite being in the immediate shock of mourning a loved one and being vulnerable enough to tell us